Over to you, Jasmine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us in yet another session of Centering the SDGs, Youth Voices. I would like to introduce the next panel, which has the title of Get Empowered, Youth Leadership in Climate Policy and Gender Equity, that will be hosted by Lower Moreland High School students. So please take the floor.
Okay, I am going to share screen. Okay, hi everyone. I hope everyone's, oh, wait. Can you guys see this? Okay, hi everyone. I hope everyone's Tuesday is going well and for meeting today. So today we are going to be discussing youth leadership in climate policy and also gender equity. My name is Sophia Berman and I attend Lower Moreland High School and am founder of our Girl Up 2030 Club. And today I am also joined by.
Hi, I'm Hannah and I'm the Girl Up 2030 and I'm from Lower Moreland High School and I'm the class of 2022.
Hi, I'm Maggie and I'm also from Lower Moreland High School. I am the Girl Up Vice President for this year and I am class of 2023.
And today we are joined by Anna Pettee, who is co-author of the workbook we will be diving in today. So Anna, if you could tell us a little more about what inspired you about the workbook and your journey thus far.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sophia and Hannah and Maggie for inviting me to speak today at this event. I'm really honored to be here and really happy to share the work that Christina Kwok, who couldn't be on the call today, but is my co-author for this resource that we worked on with Plan International. So I think there's going to be a video coming right after my introduction that'll kind of introduce a lot of the background to the workbook. But basically, we worked with Plan International to provide a tool for young people, hopefully all over the world. It's been translated into French and Spanish, and hopefully will be translated into other languages based on Plan's country offices in the times to come. But hopefully accessible to young people all over the world to support them in developing the knowledge and tools to not only kind of get introduced to the concepts of climate change and environmental justice, but also to understand how they themselves can get involved in the policymaking spaces in their countries. So at the national level, but then also if they have the opportunity at the international level. And it's really trying to push home the idea that to support a transition to a greener and more sustainable way of being, as well as a just and more just society that centers the values of equity, fairness, and justice for everybody, and not just the most privileged in society, that we need kind of changes at the highest levels of policy, and that has to be enacted through kind of collective action of individuals like the young people all around the world who are already very concerned about climate change and kind of wanting to get involved, but maybe don't necessarily have the tools or necessarily the platform to do so just yet. But we're really advocating for making more of those spaces accessible to young people. And we're hoping that this guide can be one of many resources and tools to provide young people with a little bit more of an enabling factor to get them into the spaces that they need to be in. And this is my background here. So if I thought this might be interesting to people, I know when I was in high school, I was always fascinated kind of the twists and turns that people took to kind of get where they are in their careers. I'm a very much an early career professional and have a long way to go. I should have added a little question mark at the end of that era because I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but I'm really grateful for all of the opportunities I've had through education and working internationally and now working at Unbounded Associates, which is where I got to work on this workbook. And that introduced me really to applying my background in education, teaching and instructional design to the climate change, action for climate change, education for climate action space. And I'm really excited to keep working in this space and keep applying my skill sets to addressing this really important issue that affects all of us. So thanks so much, Sophia. I'll hand it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Anna. I know something as high school students and as a senior myself is always looking to see what's next in our journey and what we will be doing, especially in today where there's a changing climate and how that might relate to our path or field. And I think that's something that's always in our minds. So that's definitely something maybe we can ask a question about later for our to share with our other Girl Up members later. So as Anna mentioned, there's a great video. Oh, let me change slides. That we'd like to share with you guys to give a little more insight and to introduce the workbook itself. If someone could give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear the audio, that would be great. Let me just.
Climate change is happening now, and the young people of today are facing and will continue to face the most pressing climate challenges for years to come.
Based on a Plan International climate change survey of over 1,800 young people from 37 countries, climate change is a universal concern, and most young people want to participate in climate policy processes.
But many don't know about the Paris Agreement or how to get involved in climate processes in their country, and this prevents their voices from being heard.
To help build young people's knowledge and skills for engaging in climate policy, we developed the Youth Leadership in Climate Policy Workbook and Facilitator's Guide.
The Workbook and Facilitator's Guide provide targeted content and activities that help learners turn their knowledge and skills into action for climate empowerment.
Youth leadership is critical in achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, as current and future generations of young people will soon be, and already are, leaders in demanding more ambitious action at the national and global levels.
The tools we developed with Plan International are to help young people access climate decision-making spaces and groups, and think critically about their own country's mitigation and adaptation priorities through a rights-based lens.
We integrate climate justice throughout the workbook because it is so central to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement and to transforming social, economic, and political systems.
In the workbook, we use the Paris Agreement and Article 12 on Action for Climate Empowerment as a launch point to introduce national climate policy processes that young people can engage with.
Activities include developing and presenting your own version of your country's nationally determined contribution, conducting a stakeholder mapping of climate actors across power and vulnerability axes, and preparing your own implementable climate policy action plan.
We are so grateful to have collaborated with Plan International, climate change education experts, and youth activists around the world to develop these tools for youth climate action.
We can't wait for the Workbook and Facilitator's Guide to be released and shared widely, and to see how young people around the world engage with them and make them their own. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you. Yes, I am unmuted. Thank you for that sneak peek video. And I know we are excited to be sharing and using the Facilitator's Guide in our Girl Up Club, something we also have shared with our environmental club, something we could collaborate to look at, to use the different activities in the workbook to build skills in climate policy as youth. And so since we are focusing on the importance of how climate change intersects with policy, we also thought something was interesting was this diagram we found. And we're thinking we could talk about how gender is tied in all of this. Anna?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to kick this off. And if anyone has any comments, anything they want to share from what they see here, we can definitely, I'd love to hear from, the participants on the call. So as the video mentioned, a really explicit focus of the workbook was incorporating concepts of justice throughout all of the content and activities. So not only are we introducing concepts like the Paris Agreement, Action for Climate Empowerment, nationally determined contributions, et cetera, we're introducing them with a lens to really, with a justice lens to really interrogate how these different documents and policy structures might benefit or harm individuals in different ways, given their backgrounds. And so when we think about the idea of justice, it's really, it kind of goes one step beyond equality, one step beyond equity, even, to not just providing people with the same opportunities or with the necessary supports to overcome their barriers, but we're also really thinking about how can we remove those structural barriers entirely and change systems to become more just for everyone. And thinking about what barriers need to be removed, they're different for every person based on your intersectionality or your background, and all of the different parts of your identity that kind of make up who you are and how you experience the world and move through different spaces. And it's very much dependent on not only your own embodied experience, but also you live and, you know, the structures that are in place in your local, national, regional geography. And I actually was looking at this diagram earlier today, and I recognized that we did make this for, you know, an international audience with a lot of different levels, varying levels of English speaking ability, as well as wanting to make it accessible to be translated into other languages. So there's definitely some aspects of intersectionality that I think are definitely missing from here. And if anyone wants to, you know, point those out and think of other parts of our identities that we, you know, want to consider when we're talking about intersectionality, I think ones that came up for me were not only gender, but definitely gender identity, sexuality, indigenous status, your geography, your socioeconomic status, maybe your race or your skin color. There's really, it can go on, and it's very much, you know, what the salient aspects of your identity are very much dependent on who you are and where you live. But I know that as the organization Girl Up, we focus a lot on gender. And I think that the importance of really recognizing how your gender identity or your gender presentation in society impacts the way that you are treated, and also can impact the way that climate change, the negative effects of climate change are felt in societies is quite important to recognize. And the way that climate change can exacerbate existing gender inequalities is also really important. I could go on, but I'm just wondering if there's any follow-up questions or anyone wants to make a comment. I don't want to just kind of like keep talking.
No, your insight is very valuable. And I agree with Mrs. Freeman in the chat that this is something that when I saw, I thought would be, or amazing to show anyone, because I think it clearly lays out how much layers there are to a person, and brings perspective to kind of the aim of our Girl Up Club. And something we always like to use is systems thinking to reveal these things and to think about whether that be an empathy map, iceberg, to, you know, look beyond the surface, because these are really important. And that's something also we find with when we're looking at the SDGs, is that a lot of them are intertwined with one another. And so in order to solve one or the other, you have to look at, so with climate action, of course, it's related to gender equality and, you know, how this is related, girls and education, STEM opportunities, where are a lot of carbon solutions coming from? And so I definitely think we hit the nail on that. Maggie or Hannah, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, what I thought was really interesting, what you said, Anna, was how this can be applied internationally. And what this whole visual does imply is the idea of how culture affects climate change, and how in different regions, different, like it says over there, like your family, your community, different cultures, different religions, and how they perceive the climate and how they treat it and respect it, which is interesting because it's just the versatility of this diagram, which can be used across the nations, like how you said.
Kind of like also going off of that with how, you know, a lot of the SDGs are intertwined with each other and kind of varying from places to place. I kind of had like my own experience with this when I visited Vietnam. So like there was a lot of issues that were deeply intertwined, and kind of a lot of it was set apart based on kind of the disparity between wealth and classes. So, you know, like I visited an orphanage, and that I kind of really saw how jarring that was, like between, you know, what kind of the conditions that I live versus like climate change, how climate change affected me versus how, you know, climate change or other issues affected them, and such as like access to healthcare or access to clean drinking water, and like different kind of issues that kind of all accumulated, especially because of the disparity of wealth and the difference between classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for your comments there. And I think something that you all bring out is not only are the, you know, impacts of climate change felt in different ways by different people based on their backgrounds, but also the quote unquote solutions to addressing the climate crisis, they will also impact and affect people differently and be felt as solutions or something else by different people based on their backgrounds. And Sophia made a good point in terms of, the types of solutions that are being mostly valued or like them given the most attention, the most financing in society are often those that are related to STEM or more technical fields. And those are also traditionally more male dominated fields. And so it's important when we think about transitioning to a greener economy, also thinking about how we can make that transition in a just way and make sure we're not perpetuating existing kind of status quos that have historically marginalized people such as women, people of color, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, et cetera. So really great to know that you guys are thinking about all these things at such a young age. It's really important to kind of, I think, honestly, when I was in high school, I'm not sure that I knew the term intersectionality. And so it's really important, I think, to have just this language and this nuanced way of thinking, because I think everything, as we've been talking about this, climate change is related to everything else, and everything is just so interrelated in whatever field you end up going into. And so being able to think with an intersectional lens is really valuable.
If I could just add something quickly, and I was thinking about it when Hannah brought up her visit to Vietnam, and what she saw here, it reminded me that, just 2 weeks ago at the high school down the street from us, we're in north central New Jersey, there was a protest where there was a group that wanted to have all LGBTQ plus materials banned from school, all the reading. And so it's where there's a movement in society to erase a whole group of people and ensure that they don't have voice, nor are they seen. And so when we think about climate change as that intensifier, multiplier, for sure. And I think that looking forward to this session, it made me think a little bit more about the interconnection of those issues.
Yes, so with that said, I think this is a great transition to introduce activity 1.4, one of the many excellent activities that we can practice, thinking about different perspectives. And another great thing about the workbook is I think there are great diagrams that can help convey sometimes really complex like concepts. And so before we break down activity 1.4, and I think it would be useful for when we share this as well to kind of know the difference between what fairness or what equality is versus equity and justice.
Sure. Yeah, happy to elaborate. So yeah, the screenshot here in the bottom left of the screen is one of a few different series of images that are in chapter 1 of the workbook that try to illustrate some interpretations of what a fairness or equality approach versus an equity versus a justice approach might look like in society. And I think it's using this metaphor that maybe you've seen in other places of kind of a wall that's acting as this barrier or kind of as the injustice that's preventing all these different individuals from accessing whatever they might need to access that's beyond that wall. So what you're seeing in the image here is kind of the representation of injustice or unfairness or inequity. And if we were to move to the other interpretation or the other representations for the images, the fairness image would be kind of giving everybody an equal support in getting over this wall. But if you can imagine kind of putting the same level block underneath each of these people's feet to kind of give them a step up, you could see how maybe the individuals who are already taller might be able to, get over that wall with that same support, but the young people who are smaller might not. They might still have a few more barriers to go. So that's kind of showing how an equality approach is important to be considering, are we making sure we're giving the same opportunities to everyone? It's definitely a baseline important thing to do, but it's not always enough given that because of structural inequalities and systemic inequalities in society, people are starting much farther back than others, right? So that means that they actually need more support often, or like more protective policies, et cetera, to get to a starting place that is actually where other people are already coming from. So that leads to the equity approach, which would be providing individuals with the supports that they specifically need to address the barriers that they face. And so that's taking into account kind of the intersectionality of people's experiences and the fact that, not only is this a short person wearing the bright green shirt, behind a wall, they're also shorter. So they might need a taller block to access what's beyond that wall. So an equity approach would be, if you can imagine, blocks of differing sizes for each of these individuals so that they can all look over the wall at the same time. And then finally, a justice approach, as I mentioned earlier, is addressing not only kind of the individual or the community or group level dynamics that need to be addressed, though that is extraordinarily important, but it's also considering kind of what we might call like the upstream issues and those systemic and structural barriers that have led to this wall being an issue in the first place. And so that's really interrogating those systems in society that perpetuate inequalities and inequities, and how can we start addressing the systems and not necessarily just addressing like the end results of the problem. So it's kind of taking a more preventative approach. If you're looking at it from like a health standpoint, it'd be taking like a preventative approach rather than just kind of a reactive approach, and really thinking about how can we transform these systems so that this wall won't exist in 5 to 10 years from now. Yeah. And I'm happy to, if anyone has any questions about that, please let me know.
And with climate justice, I think what with today, especially, is it's happening, right in our communities, maybe, and that's definitely where we're trying to make that connection with these storms that might happen usually once in 100 years, are happening maybe every 5 years, and historic amounts of flooding happening in our cities, and what that causes, displacement, and just a long line of a domino effect of issues. And so I think when we think of climate justice, the disproportionate impacts who might be vulnerable is something that we try to focus on in our climate action team, but as well throughout an entire Girl Up Club. And I think it's knowing what an equitable action is super important, because and Tran can talk about this, or Maggie can also, but it's just think about how we can, rise together and not leave someone behind in the process to move forward, in a more sustainable future. We must be, working to how can we bring girls with us across the globe in terms of education and reducing poverty. These are really important things, and I think these terms really illuminate some of these issues. Chan or Hannah.
Yeah, so kind of going on about the with the gender and equity, kind of, it really is, there is a kind of mix up between the difference with the two. That's definitely something I've kind of struggled with before, but it's just, it goes a lot to say with seeing the examples of inequality and how we're supposed to take action together, and also seeing that with policy as well, seeing how individual and collective action is not going to go as far if we're not including policy as well. So I really like seeing the kind of the elaboration on the terms.
And it makes a good point. I think a lot of times we might not know, as you said earlier, Anna, to your point, that language that is so important to talking about these topics, that are all really important to talking about policy, because policy change in terms of our climate policy is where we want to bring equitable solutions. And so with that said, I think this is a good time to dive into activity 1.4. And Anna, you can elaborate more on what we'll do, and we'll share the Jamboard on our side.
Yeah, fabulous. Excited to hear everyone's inputs on this Jamboard. This is always a really exciting time for me to get to work with everyone on the call. So yeah, activity 1.4 basically kind of applies the concepts of intersectionality as well as equity, justice, and fairness to some scenario examples of different ways or different potential scenarios that you might see in society of engaging young people in climate policy processes. So it's related to Action for Climate Empowerment, which is Article 12 of the Paris Agreement and is composed of 6 different components, which include public participation, education, awareness, training, international cooperation, et cetera. And the idea of Action for Climate Empowerment on a whole is that climate change cannot be addressed without the participation of full populations, and individuals need to be engaged and educated to be able to participate in these processes. So the example that we've chosen for us to engage in, are we able to put the link to the Jamboard in the chat so that people can navigate there themselves? So basically for this activity, there's going to be a scenario. I believe it's the public participation scenario about being offered the opportunity to apply to be a student representative at an international climate policy process, and kind of how this opportunity might provide great opportunities for some young people to be involved, but how it also might privilege some individuals over others based on their backgrounds and their intersectionality. Which is what we just spoke about. So the idea is to kind of think through the example, and the example is kind of purposefully brief and short to kind of allow you to really think about what might be missing from it and what could be added to it. So the idea is to look through the example and think about first, how might this example contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation? So at first taking not even an intersectionality lens, just really a climate change lens. And for anyone who is a little bit unsure of what these different terms are, mitigation refers to any kind of climate activity that is looking to, that the main aim is to reduce carbon or greenhouse gas emissions. So the examples could be, and sometimes mitigation and adaptation can be, they can overlap, but examples could be, switching to electric vehicles, transitioning to renewable energy sources, reforestation efforts for carbon capture, rehabilitating carbon sinks, et cetera. And then adaptation regards any activities that support countries, communities, individuals in adapting to kind of the inevitable changes in the climate that are happening because of climate change. So helping coastal communities prepare for rising sea levels, helping farmers use drought resistant seeds because of less frequent water for their crops, et cetera. And so that's the idea here, is to think about the ways in which this scenario could contribute to either or both of climate mitigation or adaptation. And really, there's no wrong answers. This is all about kind of just thinking through what what you can imagine. And you're also welcome to flip through to the forward slides after, but I think we'll probably take like 5 minutes on this slide and then we can go to the next ones together. So feel free to navigate over to the left-hand side of the Jamboard, where there's right underneath the arrow, there is it looks kind of like a little sticky note, I guess, and you click it and you can add your thoughts, and everything is totally anonymous. So just feel free to add as many thoughts as you want. I'm really excited to see what people come up with.
Yep, so as if you guys just see on your left-hand bar where my arrow is moving up and down, there are these sticky notes, and that's what we'll be using to, sticky notes I think will allow us to see them better, but use the sticky note to add your thoughts or what you were thinking. And to repeat, we're thinking about how might this action contribute to climate change mitigation, but also adaptation. And I know something that helps me differentiate the terms is thinking mitigation is more so in a sense of preventing something from happening itself, and adaptation will be kind of in the name itself, how we adapt and can live with something. But that's where mitigation is so important, and the terms are working hand in hand, because of course we want to reduce the impact of something and the severity, like climate change. And so someone put for our mitigation side the introduction to the usage of electric cars to emit pollutants, which means less gasoline. This is definitely a good mitigation point. And I think what I might put for the adaptation side, I just add my own, just make sure I see.
And then also, I wonder, Sophia, would it be valuable for maybe one of us to read the scenario just so that everyone has kind of heard it out loud? Because I think, I kind of introduced it, but I didn't fully read it.
Yeah, so the public participation scenario we will be focusing on is something that we wanted to relate back to youth. And so the Ministry of Youth in our country has set up a scholarship competition to allow 2 young people to represent our country in the upcoming international climate negotiations. The competition will be announced through schools, and the application asks you to make a 2-minute video describing your 2 top recommendations for climate action in your community. So you can put what you would put for those 2 climate actions, because I think that would be representative of what that would bring to the table if selected. And so just to read some of them, with mitigation at helping the farmers to get climate insurance protection on the crops would be really important, especially today. Adaptation, you can speak for local communities about what they need. I think this is what stuck out for me in the prompt, was that 2 young people, not just representing a country, but they can also bring insight maybe from where they are from, with maybe some of the climate impacts they know are hitting communities most, to bring light to what solutions they should be using. Tran, what are your thoughts on some of these sticky notes so far?
Sorry, I was writing one of my own, but okay, so I really liked the idea, especially for the adaptation one, where they had the youth speak to local communities. It's something I really like about kind of like the policy, the climate decision-making part of this is you learning how to communicate and building those leadership skills so you can include more people and understand people's issues and situations more, and use that to kind of build your policy and create your decisions.
And I'm also seeing a lot of great examples of kind of general mitigation and adaptation strategies that different people from different geographies or different backgrounds, such as farmers or fishers, can kind of employ, and might be might make sense depending on what your livelihood is or what your kind of scenario is, right? And I think that these are all great examples of the types of solutions or the types of strategies that young people from their communities can speak to really personally, in terms of understanding, what is needed in my local community and what specifically is going to help my parents, my family, people that I know are struggling with climate change on the front lines. And I think that's like one of the important aspects of having young people engage in these processes, is that they're often very kind of in tuned and at the local levels of what's going on, because they live in their communities and they're growing up in these spaces. So I really love seeing all these different examples of mitigation adaptation. Just looking, go ahead, Sophia. I see you want to say.
I would just like to add that a lot of these are like environmental solutions. I mean, there might be some other ones, but I'd also think that, as we were talking about earlier, is that it could also be something like education that can lead to climate change mitigation. It's more, I guess you could say it's indirect, but by focusing on the education of girls and not just, or making sure, or quality education, which is one of the SDGs, to make sure youth are empowered, especially girls or different identities, so they can be empowered to go in a field where possibly that could lead to efforts or in which improving the environment. How does that relate to their field? And when I was discussing with Anna earlier, as someone who does strive to go into a field of medicine, I think it's important to think about how the environment impacts our health. And to mitigate climate change or to reduce emissions is to also impact all of these different factors. And I think solutions aren't just how we can find different ways, whether that be for a farmer or the ocean or the land, how we can reduce our footprint, but also how we can build our skills. And I think that was something really important with girls' education, how that's an important solution and key and a stakeholder in creating change in policy. And that's also, even though this is for your country, and I guess would be the US in this case, it does say upcoming international climate negotiation. So it very much has a global impact at hand, which I think is important to keep in mind.
And maybe, people should feel free to continue adding to this page, but maybe we want to move on to the next page, since that kind of gets into the issues of intersectionality and justice and fairness. So the same scenario is up on the screen, that your country has set up a scholarship competition for 2 young people to represent your country at an international climate change negotiation. And you're kind of navigating how to get engaged with this competition through the application process, which is a 2-minute video describing your top 2 recommendations for climate action in your community. And so based on the information that's provided here, what can you imagine as to, who might be most likely to have the opportunity to apply and maybe be chosen for this competition and this opportunity, and who might, be left out because of different types of structural barriers in society and different types of, personal, background identifiers that, because of the way society is built, sometimes leads people to being more disadvantaged.
And I'm just going to make sure the Workbook activity Jamboard link is available in chat, just in case. I did notice someone else joined, so that everyone can add their own thoughts and sticky notes. Also, feel free to unmute if you'd like to talk about maybe something you thought about, or that this is kind of meant to be thought-provoking questions, because it's definitely thinking of our circles, I would say, of influence and circles of concern, and also who may be left out, who might be not. Definitely something to think about. So on our right, we have what groups and individuals might be left out or harmed, and some of our sticky notes read: girls who are uneducated or who have dropped out from schools due to economic reasons will not know about this opportunity. This is definitely something that I thought when reading this. What schools maybe is this opportunity available to, but also what language possibly, is this something everyone can participate in? Is this for older grade levels? Can it also, maybe it'd be cool if it could be available, or in some shape, way, or manner, to have younger kids to put their input, even if not selected. So we could engage our youth from across the nation to feel empowered, and that their voice is heard in decisions that will be made at a global level, or spoken at an upcoming international climate negotiation. Yes, I think that's a really good point, that for the left-hand side, who might benefit from the action, that students might have more time and resources to make a stronger application, which in this case is a video, and more resources at hand. I think this is something that we aim to do with this workshop, is to talk about how these all intersect, and how important it is for people to have opportunities to join and to hear from someone like Anna Pettee, because it really sheds light on just how important these issues are, and some things people might not think are connected, but very much are today.
I think what's interesting is that what everyone touched on was the idea that how there's disparity within the disparity. For example, you were talking about how lack of education would impair them and not allow people to have access to this opportunity. And while that is also a problem, there's also the idea regionally, like if you look at something on a national scale versus a local scale and versus an international scale.
Yeah, I echo what Maggie was saying. I was just recognizing that there's kind of different sticky notes that are talking about the school level, the individual level, the, education system level, and then also even the country level in terms of, I saw a sticky note that's talking about how, higher income countries are more likely to probably have the resources to maybe publicize and amplify this opportunity among their different among the education system, and then lesser developed countries. So exactly what you were saying, Maggie, it's really important to consider kind of all of these levels where different inequalities can play out for people.
So these are really great sticky notes. I'm really excited to see that everyone was able to put some down. And I think, yeah, and I can't wait to share this as a resource to our Girl Up members and also our environmental club at our school, and something that can be shared with the entire Center for Sustainable Development Eco Ambassador Network. So with that said, we'd like to move to a Q&A. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If Hannah Tran could kick us off for that, that would be great.
Sorry, I was struggle to unmute. Oh God, I lost a page.
Or I can, sorry, I'm gonna put you on the spot. That's something that happens with Zoom all the time, but that's okay. So first, thank you so much for everyone putting that in there. But we wanted to talk about kind of first start with maybe some intersectional lens perspective questions, and then some other things. So first, I want to know, what does policy have to do with climate action?
Sorry, these are questions for me or for anybody to answer.
These are for you, Anna. Sorry.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and I would also love to hear, I know we have other colleagues on the call from Teachers College, and anyone, also participants, if you have comments or anything from your personal experience, would love to hear your responses to these questions as well. What does policy have to do with climate action? So policy basically is the kind of I guess the highest level that can then trickle down. I guess what I would say is you can think about climate action as a spectrum, or occurring on a continuum of kind of the grassroots all the way up to the highest levels. And when we talk about the highest levels, we're maybe talking about these international policy spaces, such as, COP26, where the Paris Agreement was first produced in 2015. And when we talk about the grassroots level, we're talking about your local Girl Up organizations, student organizations, et cetera, that are creating these kind of grassroots movements. And the question is really, how do we get these two ends of the spectrum and the ends of the continuum talking to each other? Because what needs to happen is that often what we see is the activities, the values, the calls to action that are being heard at the grassroots level, they don't always make it up to the policy level. And then what's made up to the policy level, as you've seen from the example and the activity, are often the people who have the most privilege, who have the most resources, who have the time and the space to kind of engage in these high level or the access to engage in these high level discussions. And if the people who have the most privilege in society are the ones feeding into these policy processes, then it's most likely going to be that those policies are going to come out representing, you know, a minority of the population and perpetuating these inequalities that continue to privilege the already privileged in society. So that's basically the reason why policy is so critical to climate change, and why engaging in policy from the grassroots level all the way up is really, really imperative to make sure that we have this just transition, rather than a transition that, you know, continues to amplify the same voices that have been heard and that have really contributed to the climate crisis through kind of, you know, valuing extractive, exploitative, highly capitalistic mindsets and practices. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about that or anything to add, but that's, I think, how I view like the really major importance of engaging in climate policy from any perspective, and especially engaging young people and engaging people who have been historically marginalized.
Yeah, I think for many, policy for me felt daunting, and is one of the many reasons I joined debate, so I could kind of get insight into what different resolutions are and what goes on in, you know, maybe an affirmative versus negative standpoint. And something we discussed in a previous workshop about debate is that issues are multidimensional, and it's not going to be black and white. But nevertheless, it is so important for youth to be empowered in policy, because a lot of us are also on the brink of voting age. So I think that's definitely a point. And also, by the way, this is a Q&A, so questions are open for you guys to put in chat, to unmute, freely welcomed. The next question we have prepared is: circles of concern lay out 3 widening circles of climate action, like individual, community, and then policy. Which circle holds your attention right now? And did the workshop have, and did the workbook have any impact on that?
Yeah, the workbook definitely had a very, very intense impact on kind of my viewpoint and my current kind of discernment process of where I can contribute to addressing climate change and being part of this movement. I think that right now I am personally still in kind of a discernment reflection period of where I can be of best use and how I can apply kind of my skills and past experiences to this enormous issue that has so many different facets, as we've already addressed. And I think that's, you know, both a challenge, but also a huge opportunity for everyone to be able to look at this climate crisis. And if you're able to get past the very understandable challenge of, you know, being really overwhelmed and experiencing anxiety because of the magnitude of this kind of existential issue, which I definitely struggle with as well. Once you are able to kind of, you know, cope with the anxiety that is brought on by the extent of the problem, I think that there are always channels for whatever you're interested in as an individual and whatever passions you have and aspirations you have for your own livelihood and your own future, to be able to connect that with kind of sustainable practices, environmentally friendly viewpoints, and a perspective of justice and supporting kind of this movement towards a just transition, addressing climate change. And I guess that's where I am right now, is thinking about how can I continue to, you know, be on this path of developing my own career as an education professional, which is what I'm passionate about, but with this newly reinforced, strengthened lens of how can it also contribute to addressing climate change. So I guess the circles of influence I'm really interested in right now are personal as well as community level, but I'm definitely interested, you know, through curriculum, integrating education or climate change education curricula at you know, state and national levels in the United States, but also around the world. It's really important that education is one of the facets of kind of this transition, because not only do we need changes in the economy, we need new generations to be learning about climate change from the moment that they enter school. So I think there's also so much to be done at the policy level that I think, again, I'm discerning if that's where my where my skill sets lie. I'm a very interpersonal person. I love working with individuals. So it might be more at the community or, person to person level. But this is all to say that I really encourage everyone on the call or listening in to, not feel like you have to abandon your personal aspirations and passions as a young person to tackle this huge issue that is not, it's not your burden to bear. But we all have responsibility as, inhabitants of this earth to think about the future and think about the climate. But there's definitely ways to do that while also thinking about your own interests and what you want for your future as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you were saying, Anna. And I think the idea that we all have this collective responsibility creates a sense of unity, therefore kind of taking away some of the disparity in addressing climate change, and creates a sense of almost hope and motivation for those interested in addressing the issue, no matter what socioeconomic level you're on, or how many resources or how much access to resources you have. The idea that everyone has this responsibility.
I have a question coming from educator side. So my name is Betsy, the middle school teacher, avid supporter of the Eco-Ambassador Network. I think one of the phenomenal things that the Eco-Ambassador Network does is it lets us hear, and by us, I'm gonna, come from my constituency then of educators to hear what kids are doing and thinking worldwide, right? So I think the word, and Maggie, you may have said it, the responsibility. And so I'm wondering what you would like to see happen in schools, and I guess what the educator's responsibility is, and then what the student's responsibility is in there to bring, I guess, climate action, real world connections into your day-to-day learning.
It's a really great question, Betsy. Thank you so much. It's definitely a difficult question. I think when we talk about responsibility, it can be a loaded topic because we don't want to place undue burden or responsibility on folks who have had very little hands in creating the climate crisis. And that's often what happens when we see, Indigenous communities, Black, Brown, and BIPOC communities, et cetera, kind of bearing the brunts of the climate crisis. We don't want to put more responsibility on the backs of these folks. So I think in addition to the idea of responsibility, there's a concept in the Paris Agreement called common but differentiated responsibilities. And it's the idea that we all have this collective, as Maggie said, collective responsibility to address climate change as common inhabitants of this planet. But we have to recognize the differentiated abilities of individuals, communities, countries to address these challenges based on the resources that are available to them, their historical engagement in climate change, et cetera. And I think that this is in the Paris Agreement, so it's kind of applied at a high level policy standpoint, but I think it can also apply at the kind of school level, as you're mentioning here. And so in terms of what I would say is the responsibility of teachers and students, I think I feel as though it's more of a responsibility for, education systems to make it as easy as possible for educators who are already working tirelessly to engage with students, to make meaningful connections with their students, to make it as easy as possible for these often already overburdened educators to integrate these concepts of sustainability and climate change into their lessons and into their curricula. And that was something that when we were designing the workbook, we really wanted to be sure that we weren't creating activities that required a lot of resources or required a lot of I guess, extra inputs from teachers, because we recognize that teachers all around the world are already, often stretched quite thin in terms of their preparation time or their access to other materials. So I think it's really important to, when I say climate change needs to be taught in schools, I'm not saying, teachers need to be spending 2 extra hours to add this to their lesson plans. I think it's more that education systems and the people who are in power and have the positions to do that need to be integrating these concepts into the curricula that's being disseminated, and then making it as easy as possible, making it an opportunity for maybe, certification for kind of incentivizing, teachers to be able to incorporate this into their lessons. And then I don't know if it's necessarily the responsibility of young people, but I think the responsibility of us as a society to provide young people with the opportunity to engage in these issues in ways that connect to their local realities and connect to their lives and what they care about. Because I think if I've learned anything in my time being a teacher, my time working in the education field, young people are curious, young people they always care about something. And it's kind of, the question is how do you connect what they care about with this big issue? And one of the professors that I was speaking with, who's working on climate change, resilient waters in South Africa, was telling me, like, when they're thinking about how to connect to South African youth about climate change, they're thinking it's always kind of this phrase, climate change and ... What is that? And, how do you connect climate change to what these young people are dealing with in their everyday lives? Because you almost always can connect it, right? So it's really finding those connections. And then I think the responsibility is then kind of cultivated by young people themselves, right? We can't tell young people you have to do this, but we can give them the tools, the skills, the knowledge. A lot of times it's just exposure and awareness. Give them those tools, and then I think their passion and their sense of responsibility is cultivated often naturally.
Yeah, I know several students are also here today, so if they'd like to talk about their thoughts on engaging youth and climate change efforts at the school level, please feel free to unmute for the discussion. I'll first say that I think we have so much curiosity, and that really it is to just take action where maybe there isn't, and to collaborate with others, and because working together can transform our communities, and a rising tide will raise all boats. By myself, girl up, would I be able to function? It's really just all of ourselves working together, our different teams, how we spread awareness, our funds team, our climate action, our storytelling, amplifying voices, they all work hand in hand. And I think we can make partnerships like with the environmental club. Schools that might not have these clubs, make one. And I think that and to start it with others, that's so important. And I think it's kind of a journey just all together. We're figuring out things to do along the way, and we're learning more, just like how we are learning from this workshop. And we also had mentioned in the circles of concerns question about reflection, and I think that's really important. I remember out in the summer when I went out to the Adirondacks to talk about how we were going to build back our green teams, and we sat in our circle right in nature and just talked about some of our fears, and it really allowed me to think and share with others what I was scared for in the future, and that's okay. And that, I think for me, what instills my yes to action is what I can do with others and how we can empower each other. And I think that leads us to our final Q&A question, but also if you guys have any remaining questions in the chat or would like to unmute, that would be wonderful, is how tackling climate change and climate policy can feel daunting. What motivates your yes to taking climate action, and how do you find ways to empower yourself while also empowering others?
Great, thanks for that question. I'm aware of the time, and I really appreciate everyone for joining and staying on the call. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think what motivates my yes is really similar to what you just shared, Sophia, is seeing all of the commitment from my peers, from people who are younger than me especially, and recognizing, I also have a responsibility in this issue. And not only do I have a responsibility, I personally really care about it. So I think that for me, the yes is very simple. And not only that, I do recognize I have quite a bit of privilege in being able to say yes quite easily, in that I have a steady job, I have a strong educational background, I have kind of the intellectual space and time to consider these issues, right? I'm not burdened by a lot of other things throughout my day I'm able to dedicate my career to thinking about climate change. So that's a privilege in itself. So I feel very privileged to be able to engage in these issues at the level that I am, and to be able to be on calls like this. And I think in terms of, how do I hope to engage community members and engage others? I think exactly what you were saying, there's kind of, there's interpersonal levels, and kind of just making it a part of conversation with people that you care about, to let them know that this is something that's important to you. Because oftentimes, you know, I think especially when I've been talking to people from all around the world, they often say, you know, I care about climate change because my child came home one day and was really upset about the state of the world. And, you know, I don't want my child to feel this way forever. So I'm now engaged in doing something too. So I think that those interpersonal connections and seeing people you care about take on these issues can make a big difference. And then additionally, creating those networks, like you said, can help make people feel less alone in what can be a really sometimes isolating and scary process of kind of like contemplating the gravity of these issues. So I think for me, it's finding those networks and discerning kind of what I can contribute and where I also can amplify the voices of others and can take a backseat, because that can also be really important to recognize kind of whose voices need to be heard the most in these spaces, and you know, what can I do to amplify those. And yeah, intergenerational learning is so important, Betsy, I really agree. And it's been really a fabulous opportunity to work with both young people and people, you know, professionals who are older than me, such as Christina, who couldn't be here, but she's taught me really so much about these issues. So I'm just ever grateful for the mentors that I've had and the opportunity to work with people younger than me who've also taught me so much. So thank you so much for this time and for inviting me to this call. I really welcome any further conversation that you'd like. I'm going to put the link to the workbook in the chat, which is now available to download from Plan International. And I'll also put my email if anyone wants to reach out.
Yeah, we're really excited to use the workbook in our Girl Up Club this Friday. We're going to be diving into also activity 1.4 and seeing some with the other topics, because it also looks at education, public awareness. There are a bunch of different topics that we can look at and think about. So I couldn't have said it any better. And I will also, if you guys would like to save the Jamboard, you guys can take this with you to refer back to. I know I definitely will, since that's something really important to thinking of solutions, and just to see how we're all coming from a different standpoint in our thinking. And just thank you so much for joining us today, Anna. We really appreciate it. Your insight was transformative, absolutely moving. And I definitely walked away learning something and having another yes to my motivation. So Anna, Maggie, any final thoughts, closures?
I'd just like to say, like Sophia was saying, thank you so much. I really was listening to everyone comment on what you were saying, kind of branch off the discussion. It was really interesting and just allowed me to open my mindset a little more regarding climate change and attacking the problem.
I would also just like to say thank you for everyone who came, and thank you for Anna for coming and speaking with us. It really was, like Maggie said, like very eye-opening, and kind of especially seeing the policy side. And it's not something I really thought about before, but it's something that I'd love to take with me in the future.
And thank you, Radhika, for having this amazing opportunity to have this workshop and to be able to share this with the rest of the network. I know we talked about our different networks and how we can connect with them, and this is one of the many ways we can. And so I look forward to the rest of the upcoming events this week and sessions. Shout out to the one this Friday, which we'll be looking at how we can look at food waste as one of the main ways we can cut down on emissions, making that direct impact, cutting emissions at a local level in our schools. So that's school action. And I really look forward to that.
Thank you so much again. This has been fabulous. It's really been great.
For everyone for joining.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. And you made me think too hard for the activities, but it was good. Thank you.